You're listening to Seek Up, the yoga inspiration show, right here on UK Health Radio, the world's #1 talk health radio. I'm Kina McGregor, your host, world-renowned yoga teacher, author of multiple books, and founder of Om Stars, the world's first online TV channel. Get ready to raise your vibration and dive into the spiritual lessons from the yoga tradition. Even if you've never practiced yoga before, you'll find kernels of wisdom to help make your world a happier and more peaceful place. So let's dive in. Let's seek up and leave with a little dose of inspiration.
I suppose the first question, knowing you're in Mysore right now, well, you've been in Mysore through the various incarnations. Obviously, you were there in Lakshmipuram and the tiny Shala, the original Shala. Then you were there in Gokulam. I remember you there. And then now in the new airplane hangar, I suppose. Without kind of saying, it's all the same, which I'm sure you're going to say, it's the same practice, how has it changed and how have you adapted to Mysore over these different incarnations and years you've been going?
Well, while you're right, the practice is the same. It is also remarkably different, So If I think back to my first trip to India more than 20 years ago, I think it was in 2000, then the country of India was just totally different, So we were practicing in that small shala in Lakshmipuram with 12 students at a time. The community here was quite small. There were only 40 students when I came, and then it whittled down to there being only 12 of us left for at the end. And so there was one batch in the small shala, and it was still at 4 a.m. and walk over in the darkness and practice. It was really special, and felt really isolated then because there was no internet. There was no private internet really. You had to go to an internet cafe, and it was a dial-up connection, and you felt really far away from everything back at home because, nobody had cell phones and there was no kind of FaceTiming with your family and stuff like this. The iPhone hadn't been invented yet. And, there was no...
How old are you?
Yeah, exactly.
Before the iPhone?
Yeah. No. And, then to see them shift into the Gokulam Shala when there were, I don't know how many people in Mysore, then like 50. And I remember people saying, even to me back then, on my very first trip to Lakshmipuram, it's not the same anymore. Oh, it's too many people. Well, I don't even bother going. It's not what it used to be. People said that to me back then in 2000. And I'm really grateful that I didn't listen to them and I went. And then, there was a shift when Pattabhi Jois died and the community shifted. There was a shift also, I think, when the, revelations about various egregious acts that Pattabhi Jois had done came to light in our Ashtanga community. There was a shift then. And I feel that right now what Sharaji is doing in his new Shala is very much kind of claiming his own space. And I feel for him to be the grandson of such a sort of momentous and powerful figure, it has been something for him to claim his own identity within this lineage. And being here in this new Shala, which is outside of Gokulam, maybe 15, 20 minutes outside in a whole new space, it's entirely of his own creation. So he chose the floors, he put the floors down, he organized the Shala. And so it's all really set up as he wanted it, as he wants it. So there is this feeling of a new energy. And it is this feeling of a very intentionally created space that, is definitely rooted within the lineage, but it's very much, consciously created in, in the new vein of what we could say the practice is. So, for example, one of the things that I noticed when I walked into the Shala is that up on, and there is kind of like, a platform that Sharaji sits on for conference, mostly just for conference, actually. And like he doesn't, I've not seen him sit once during the Mysore practice. So I've only seen him sit during the conference. He stands and looks around. But I've not seen him sit once during the Mysore practice. But walking in up on the stage area, there were little information cards, what we could call in the West consent cards. So there's and they're laminated, and one says, "I'm injured," and another one says, "I'm pregnant," and another one says, "I don't need help today." and anybody can take them. And I've actually seen, I've seen a woman who has an ankle injury walk up to the stage every day and grab an "I'm injured" card and put it in front of her mat. And I saw someone else grab "I don't need help today" and put that on their mat. So people are using them. And that's kind of really, really new in terms of the teacher-student relationship. And I think that Shadaji's been able to do that in his space and kind of create that. There's also three of his long-term Indian students, local students here in Mysore, have a beginner's batch that they teach kind of on an upstairs ledge. And this is something that is so it's before there was only kind of the really intense batch in the morning and then an afternoon kind of relaxed batch. And now there's kind of an intermediary batch. And you see a lot more of the locals coming in because now they can come at a time that doesn't interfere with their job and this kind of thing. And there's so many more Indian students than there used to be from all over India, but also especially Mysore and the southern region of Karnataka. And so that's really, really nice to see. There's, of course, the assistants started coming in the Shala. So there's assistants, and that's been going on for a little while, but it's just, there's a really kind of nice energy that's there. And I feel like, Shadaji just opened the space before the pandemic, and then he was stuck like we all were in not teaching. And he was doing these lead classes with us online, which we were really grateful for. But there seems to be this felt by everyone who's here, this gratitude to kind of be here, hopefully with COVID in our rearview mirror.
Well, that's definitely a more comprehensive answer than I was expecting. And I really, I was just expecting the kind of roll-fest, the practice is the same, but very, very nice to hear. And for someone who hasn't been, for a few years, I'm kind of very curious and that's great. And I mean, the obvious next question is how do you envisage your practice with Sharath has changed and your relationship with Sharathji has changed over the years, and especially as you were always someone who could almost get away with anything when we weren't meant to be kind of doing any of this kind of marketing or even like writing or talking about Ashtanga or anything. You were there doing everything, and you still had this great relationship, it seems, with Pattabhi Jois and Sharathji. So how have you managed it over all these years? First of all,
well, I mean, I think that first of all, I see them, and I have always seen them both as my teachers. So for me, I felt like they're my teachers, and when I'm in their presence, I'm going to do everything I can to be a really, really good student. And at the same time, I have always been someone to never kind of create distance. So I would always just completely tell them everything that was going on. So, I mean, I remember in Lakshmi Puram Shala, I wanted to try to do some of the asanas myself, and Pattabhi Jois was coming to help me, and I wanted to try to do it myself before he helped me. And even then I looked at him and I said, self-trying possible one time, please? And he'd let me try, and then he would help me. And after, so I have always just communicated to both of them as I would communicate almost to anyone. And I remember in the first time I was in the Gokulam Shala, I did something to my shoulder and I walked right into the office and I said, last night, I don't know what happened. I just woke up and my shoulder is hurting. I don't know what I'm going to do today. I'm just letting you both know my shoulder feels a little off. And I would just constantly tell them, I would give them little reports about how I was feeling and what I was doing and this kind of thing. Yeah. And honestly, it's them who kind of saw the potential of me to be a teacher. I never thought I was going to be an Ashtanga teacher. I never asked for the authorization or the certification. In fact, I had a guilty conscience about teaching a little bit because after my first trip to India, when I came back, I absolutely did not want to teach, but I would talk to people and then they would say, that sounded really awesome. Could you show me what you learned in your 2 months in India studying with these yoga masters? And I was like, no, I'm not qualified. I'm not a teacher. And I would try to send them to other places. And at some moment I started to be like, okay, I'll show you what I know, but I'm not going to take any money for it. And then I felt really guilty about that. And then I remember on my second trip there, sitting in Pattabhi Jois's office, and I felt I was going to confession. And I just did this whole I'm so sorry, but I actually taught people this yoga. I really apologize. I know I wasn't supposed to, and I'm so sorry. And immediately he smiled and said, teaching for you, no problem. Go teach. next year you take authorization. And then Chatterjee was there, and then he said to me, next year you take authorization. Then when you finish advanced, you take certification. So they volunteered that for me when I was just like, oh, okay, it's really not what I was asking for. And I just ran out of the office and didn't tell anybody. And, and then it all kind of happened. So I feel like they constantly pushed me to sort of to teach. And, I feel like my intention has always been to kind of make the practice more accessible and to help people try to understand that they can do it. And, I feel like that's really the essence of what I've been doing. So I felt like, I feel like in my own heart, I felt like I'm keeping true to my own, to the lineage in my own way. And if my teachers have something to say to me, let them say it to me directly, So that's kind of how I guess I feel I've been able to just navigate the space of, maybe there's some, ideas of what people have the dogma of the practice is, but I always just go back to, I have a relationship with these beings and I tell them things and they interact with me. So if they have a problem, they have no problem telling me when I'm doing something wrong. If my toe is out of line or my gaze is wrong, they're the first ones to tell me. So they'll tell me if I'm doing something wrong.
Did they ever mention anything? Did Shrat say, "Oh, I read your book, by the way, it was really good," or "Nice mat," or do they ever pass comment anything? Anything you were doing like that?
Chatterjee made some comments about mats or something like that. Like I think he asked me like, "Oh, Kino, I like this mat." I think it was like, "Where did you make it? How did this come?" So we've had conversations like that. And then, I did have a conversation with him about like videos on YouTube, and he brought it up, and he actually said, "I'm so sorry people are complaining about your videos on YouTube." He actually said that because apparently someone had complained to him about my videos on YouTube. And then, and this was like long back before I started OmStars, and it was like a long time ago when YouTube was really our primary interface with the online world. And then he said, "I told them to leave you alone, that you're just trying to help people."
Wow. It seems like you've been very blessed in your relationship with this, and then the whole thing has just flown naturally. I'm sure it hasn't. I mean, no one's kind of practice life flows naturally, but it appears that way. I mean, how did you first get into it? What were you doing before, by the way? What did you have a career before, or what were you doing before and how did you start and get into it? Yeah.
I mean, I did my first yoga class when I was 19. So I was still in school, in undergraduate school. And I really didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. I had a few different ideas of what the career trajectory would be like. And then it just sort of deviated. And I just realized I didn't want to pursue those actions. So I still pursued higher education. And then it was actually when I moved to New York City to get my master's degree from New York University, or NYU, that I started to tap into this traditional Ashtanga yoga community. And then it was really from there that yoga just kind of took over my life. I just never pursued more higher. I tried for a little bit, but my heart was never really in it to pursue more higher education. And I just felt like, more than anything, after that first trip to India, I just felt like I want to get back to India and spend as much time as I can with these teachers, especially Pattabhi Jois, who was older. I just felt like, I don't know how much time he has left. I want to really be here for as long as possible. So my first trip was for 2 months. The next time I came to India was for 6 months. And the next time I came was another for 6 months. So I just felt like, let me go and immerse myself in the practice. And that's really all I wanted. I just wanted to immerse myself in the practice as much as I could.
And obviously you had, we don't need to touch upon the issue particularly, but you had a positive experience of Pattabhi Jois and that, that for you. Yeah.
So for me, because of my positive relationship with Pattabhi Jois, and because I never experienced any of the egregious acts of harm that he committed towards other individuals, that was a big reckoning for me in regards to, hearing that someone who's treated you really nicely has harmed others. So that created a sort of opened up a whole door of soul searching. And it wasn't really easy, to be honest with you. And when these revelations came to light, I was actually going through like a personally really difficult period, totally unrelated to anything in the Ashtanga community. And so it was actually really difficult to process, just because I was personally spread really thin amongst some very, very other difficult and challenging experiences in my life. And there were some situations where I was just totally blindsided by the information and didn't have the time to process before, unfortunately, being sort of asked to make public statements about what was happening. And because I was enmeshed in this other really intense thing that was going on, I was actually kind of not enmeshed in what was going on in the Ashtanga community, because this other thing that was going on, that was just really, really intense and reaching like what felt like, astronomical scale of just disastrous proportions. So that actually, I joined, I gave a podcast interview that I thought was going to be about the other stuff that was going on. And then it turned into being completely about everything that was happening about Pattabhi Jois. And I was totally blindsided. And I, unfortunately, I only realized that it was kind of an inappropriate ask. And I should have just said, look, I'm not prepared to speak about this. I haven't really read up on this. I need some time to process on my own. Instead, I just tried to kind of like speak. And I really should have said no. And then unfortunately, later that day, I said, I really don't think that what I said in this interview is really indicative of how I want to represent this. I'm not processed. And because of my own personal traumatic past, I don't always recognize when things aren't right away. It often takes me 24, 48 hours to realize, hey, that wasn't cool with me. And these were two men that just said, you missed your chance. So we're just going to take this and publish it anyway. And we don't care what you think.
UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good. UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good.
So I felt violated by the podcast, but I never felt violated.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I kept saying, this is unacceptable. This crosses a line for me. Please don't publish this. You don't have I literally said, you don't have my consent. And here they go, two white men publishing an interview with me about consent violations and about, boundary violations and abuse of women, when I'm literally using the words to them, I don't give you my consent. And they did it anyway. Because I knew that what I said was off the cuff, and I knew that what I said hadn't been processed because I hadn't had the emotional space to process it. You know what I mean? So I'm still kind of like, gosh, I wish they hadn't have done that. But, what it led me to was then I had like direct conversations with Karen Rain, and I did go through the process work around that. But I just wish I would have been able to have gone through the process work around that before being asked to speak publicly. And I wish I would have had my own boundaries strong enough. But unfortunately, because I'm a trauma survivor myself, I sometimes don't get my boundaries stable right from the beginning, especially when there's a man that's being really, really forceful towards me. That's the exact situation where I'm often like going with the flow to try to make it okay. I realized 24 to 48 hours later, like, oh, that actually wasn't okay. So,
That's utterly unacceptable to not. I mean, I always say here, like, if it's not, if it's not what you want to say, then just we'll can it. I mean, I can't believe that. What a shame. I mean, just closing this subject now, because I want to talk about other things as well. And this has had a lot of airtime, and it's still a hot button. Well, has your relationship with the practice changed, and the way that you teach and present it changed due to any of this information? Do you think? I mean, obviously, your teaching has changed over the years anyway. But, do you think it's directly changed due to any of this?
Well, I think all of our teaching has changed because of it. So, the fact that these kind of consent cards and informational cards are available in the Shala here and in Mysore, with strategy is evidence that the whole community has kind of evolved. There's so much more space for kind of the agency of the student, and there's so much less rigidity around the dogma, around, what constitutes good practice, So I think we've all softened. And I almost feel like, people that are newer to the practice, like, if we can kind of help them maybe not fall into the dogma, then that's a benefit for them. But maybe people need to go through like a really kind of like enthusiastic, dogmatic, strict, rigid period so that they can soften at some moment. So maybe it's okay that people are sort of in that stage themselves if they're there. But myself personally, I think there's been a dramatic number of things that have definitely evolved my teaching. Definitely taking Pattabhi Jois off of that pedestal has been a very big shift in how I present the teachings. And it's interesting because, being non-Indian and, mixed race, but not of Indian origin, I'm super sensitive to paying respect to the origin culture of India and really integrating as much of that as possible in the presentation of the practice, while at the same time being really kind of conscious about some of the things that we may not see as non-Indians coming into the practice. For example, the different sort of privileges and access points to this practice historically within India, and how that kind of cloistering of the knowledge may have impacted other non-privileged members of, Indian society. And at the same time, the question of accessibility is, of course, a question of social justice. So it's kind of like, as I evolve as a human being, and I want to include more questions of accessibility in the practice, then I think that sort of begs the question of bringing social justice issues to kind of the forefront of the teaching. I mean, for myself personally, I'm a long-term Vipassana meditator, so I've been sitting for about 20 years. And I think that maybe taking Pattabhi Jois off the pedestal kind of gave me permission to really integrate in a much more concrete way how the teaching of Vipassana has personally impacted my own practice. And now I'm integrating it much more consciously in my teaching.
Yeah. I can see in what you're doing that, yes, it's, increasingly trying to make it more and more accessible, doing, more kind of variations on postures and kind of making it so every single person has accessibility to what is an amazing technique. And that's fantastic to see, because obviously you're a leader in this field, not only in yoga, but in Ashtanga. So, for you to be doing that is a really important and fantastic thing. Not to dumb it down at all, but how did you develop your teaching in the first place? Because, okay, you've got these old teachers and they're kind of famous, and they were kind of famous for being old, right? But then you just came up out of nowhere. Like, how did you do that? And did you do it on purpose? I mean, to some extent, right? And you're using social media, but I mean, you really are obviously a phenomenon in what you've done and how you created a career out of it. So I'd love for you to say anything about that you could.
Well, I think that, I feel like after I got the formal authorization from my teachers, I felt like, okay, now you have responsibility to teach. So now you have to do it. And I remember, I guess it was sort of a weird confluence of different events, is that I was sitting in Denmark because, my husband, Tim, is from Denmark, but he wasn't my husband then. He was a very attractive, tall man with blue eyes that I'd met and wanted to see again. And Tim used to be a dancer and a choreographer, and he had his own dance company in Denmark and was kind of at the avant-garde of the dance community of Denmark. And, just because he met me, it wasn't like, okay, well, let's immediately move to Miami. That took a few years. So I was sitting in Denmark with this authorization to teach, thinking, how am I going to teach? And I don't really have, I don't have a work permit. I'm not really sure. What can I do? And I thought, well, then Tim said, well, why don't you just give a workshop here? And I thought, okay, well, I could try that. And then when I had been in India, there was a woman from Ireland who said, I want to learn to jump through, and I see the way you jump through, and I want you to teach me what you do. And I was like, you really should ask Pattabhi Jois and Sharath how to jump through. I'm not your teacher. And then she said, well, I did. And they said what I was doing was fine, but I'm not fine with it. So I want to do what you do. Would you teach me? And I was like, I won't teach you, but if you come over for chai, we can play around with jump throughs together. How about that? And I was really like, I'm not your teacher, but I'll drink chai with you and we can kind of like talk about jump throughs, how everybody like talks about all their asanas here in Mysore and their off time, and then like we got into like, do this, do that, try this, do this, all the kind of stuff that I do, because I had to teach myself all of this stuff. So I wasn't naturally good at anything. And so I just literally shared with her kind of like my process and inner dialogue around how I went from not doing it to doing it. And she said, wow, this is really awesome. Would you come to Ireland and teach my students this same technique? And I was like, Ireland is like really close to Denmark, so I'm going to say yes to that. And I said yes, because I thought, well, what am I going to do in Denmark? And I felt like I can't just derail my life for some tall, attractive, blue-eyed boy that I met. I need to have something that I'm doing properly over there. So I was like, yes. And Alex Medin, who's a wonderful friend of mine, he runs the center up in Nysen in Norway, which I go to teach at in the summer. It's one of my favorite places in the world. So Alex was a former dancer and many things, but Alex had this idea of creating a dance performance in honor of Pattabhi Jois's 10th or whatever visit to England. And he thought I'd been a dancer, which I had never been a dancer, and I was never a gymnast, but he thought I was. So he invited me to be a part of this dance performance. So then I had two things that I was doing in Europe. And as part of that, then the yoga studio that Alex was a part of invited me to like give some talks and do some things while I was there. And the dance performance was utterly humiliating, because if you've never been a dancer and then you need to dance, it's just absolutely like, it was worse than any asana, because I feel like you're allowed to fail at asana, but this was just horrible. And there was all this terminology I didn't know. And I mean, I managed to do it at the end. And luckily Tim came over to London and he helped me out a little bit, because he was at least understood what like tendu and whatever and releve. And I have no idea. I was just like, they're saying all these words and I'm like, bleh, bleh, and I'm really bad and not able to keep the time. It was just horrible. And then I was like freaking out because Pattabhi Jois was going to be there. And so whatever, it was really bad. But we did this performance, and then this kind of like,
yeah, I remember.
Oh God, you were there. Oh no, there's a video of it out there too, which I hope they all burn or get lost and don't get digitized. Like, please, Lord, let that never arrive on YouTube. So then anyhow, but like from that, a lot of people started talking to me. What are you doing over here? Oh, I gave a little talk over there. I did a jump through workshop in Ireland. And then really quickly, people started just asking me to like show up and teach something. So that's kind of how it started, that I would do workshops in different places. It's this weird combination of being like stranded in a foreign country and not really having anything to do. But then at some moment I decided to be like, okay, let's do this. Like, let's reach out. And the hardest place for me to reach out was actually in Miami. Because I wasn't there long enough to really build up a community. And in the United States, everybody at that point would just ask for your Yoga Alliance certificate. And I didn't have one, And when we opened, after I got the certification and Tim got the authorization and he let go of his dance company in Denmark, and we sort of moved to Miami and opened Miami Life Center. At that point, we both got on the phone to Yoga Alliance and we're like, harassing them to give us what they call grandfathering in accreditation. So they did, but it was like really ridiculous to have like spent, years at this point studying yoga, traditional yoga with our teachers in Mysore, and also the various other chanting and philosophy teachers that we connect with here, like Jayashri and Narasimhan, and then to have Yoga Alliance be like, have you done a course here in the United States that meets our requirement? I was like, no, but I can document all these hours in India. And then they finally did. But it was like a lengthy process. I was like, and it was like faxing papers into them and whatnot. And they finally accepted it. So yeah, it's kind of been a weird, circuitous kind of path, but also serendipitous. It's been like, well, there was a need here, and so then okay, let's explore that need, and then there's a need here, and then okay, let's explore that and see where it goes. I never thought that I wanted to start making videos. To be honest with you, the way I started making videos was that eHow, which is a website based in the US that gives like short tutorials on everything from yoga to how to fix your air conditioning machine and how to put, antifreeze in your refrigerator or whatever, a coolant in your car. they contacted me one day and said, we've identified you as a yoga expert. Would you like to make some short videos for us? And then they gave me a list and they were going to like pay me. And I was excited. I was like, wow, sure, no problem. And then the guy who made the video said to me, it's because I would complain about some of the topics that they gave. I was like, this isn't real. This is ridiculous. Why are we even, there was something like yoga for, or like 10 best yoga pants. And I was like, I don't want to talk about yoga pants. I want to talk about something else. And he said, why don't you make your own YouTube channel? So I said, okay, sure. And so we made a financial agreement for him filming the videos and we opened my YouTube channel. And that's kind of how it started.
Thing is, I think you do have quite a lot of yoga pants though. So it was a fairish question. And he'd obviously seen something there. I can answer the question. I can answer the question why you're good and why you've been so popular myself, because I always recommend people to look at your videos. They're excellent and they really are practical and kind of like give variations, give possibilities, give step by step. They're really great. So yeah, I want to say on behalf of everyone, thank you for them. I've used them myself. Fantastic. What other influences have you taken on and brought into the practice to develop this? Or I suppose it's a broader question as well. Like, what other influences, be they physical or non-physical? You talked about Vipassana and different things. Have you brought into the practice that have been most informative?
I mean, I feel Vipassana meditation is probably the foundation of my sadhana as well as the asana practice. There's definitely been a shift that I felt like I love my asana practice, but my sitting practice is really the ground that keeps me sane. So I feel that there's like elements to my morning sadhana, and I sit for 1 hour every morning. And then after I sit, then I have a time of prayer where I connect in with the divine, I connect in with God. And for me, that's the time that's really, really sacred and quiet. And I really would prefer to have no interaction with the world until at least that is done. I don't mind if I talk to people after that, before I do my asana practice. And then after that time of meditation and prayer, then I often feel like if I have the time, but I'm not ready to just stand and samastitihi and start doing sun salutations. So then I will do a few very light kind of restorative postures to sort of help me make this transition from this very deep, introspective, quiet space into my personal practice. So that I feel is something I'm integrating more and more in my teaching, because I think that this is something that we miss very often as Ashtanga yoga practitioners, is the more subtle elements of the practice and the kind of permission to go a little softer. And the permission to have a day where we may do the Ashtanga practice, but in a deconstructive means. Pattabhi Jois always said that Ashtanga is breath, body, and focus. So when these three elements are present, we can be doing the Ashtanga method. It doesn't mean we have to nail every jump through and do our deepest touch. But if our mind is present and we're feeling our bodies and we're aware of our breath, if these three elements are present, we're still on the path. And this can create more sustainability in the practice rather than create this impossible sort of endless series of achievement where the goalposts keep just seem to moving. And then instead we can learn to kind of, just be. So, I mean, I think the spirituality of the practice and the spirituality of life is definitely a very big influence on my teaching and my practice and how I see the practice. And that, for me, I think is the essence really of why we keep getting on the mat, why we keep showing up. Personally, right now, I've been on this kick for a few years, is that I'm very interested in the sort of leading edge research done in the field of positive psychology and happiness studies that kind of talks about the neurobiological basis of various moods and proclivities and how certain practices can influence our cognitive biases as well as the hardwired structure of our neurobiology. And I've been so interested in it. So I even considered like, should I stop teaching and go back to school and get another degree because I'm really interested in it. But I'm just a really avid reader. So I'm just like devouring books on the topic. And Tim's my husband, Tim is looking at me like, you're reading another one of those neuroscience books. Cause then I suddenly like talked to him about like, did you know that?
Well, I was going to ask about other physical aspects that you might do and include in practice, or what other physical aspects you've brought into practice. But maybe before that, how do you fit all this stuff in the day? I mean, I've always looked at your workload and you go and teach, and then you're going to your room, say at Purple Valley, for hours, writing another book, and I've just read Kino's new book, Act of Love. It's really, really good. I mean, there's so many different references you bring into the book as well that shows a breadth of reading. It's, people are going to want to know, like, how do you structure and not get super stressed out with your life and all the demands on stars and all the different things you're doing? I can't even know how much you're doing. How do you make a line between these things and leave time for poor Tim?
I hear you. It's a good question. The whole question of, boundaries and work-life balance and this sort of thing. I mean, I think that first of all, reading, I just really enjoy reading. So for me, reading is a way that I relax. So I prefer reading over movies. So I think that's one of the ways that I accumulate a lot of reading. If I'm left alone, I read rather than watch things. And I feel it's just, for me, it's more stimulating for my brain. It's more relaxing. I'm not, and blessing and a curse. I can't go to bed after watching a movie. It's impossible for me. I'm really sensitive to visual stimulus. So we just watched, Tim and I were big Game of Thrones fans. So we watched House of the Dragon. And then I'm like, when Tim, he watches the episode and he's like, and then he brushes his teeth and goes to bed. And I'm like, oh my God, I need to calm down. So then I read for an hour just to get the dragons out of my brain. And then I can, then I meditate for a little bit and then I sleep. So I'm constantly okay, Tim is really the only person that makes me watch things because this is he really loves, so he's really super visual and, former choreographer and working in the arts. He's really interested in cinematography things and just loves watching movies and stuff like that. So what we'll often do to kind of spend a little time together, and Tim will be like, do you want to watch something? And I'm always conscious of what time it is. We'll eat something, watch a movie, spend a little time together. I've tried to get him to co-read with me, but that has never succeeded at being a habit.
Read it out to him, like a bedtime story.
UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good. UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good.
Yeah. Well, what happens is then what it will be is Tim will then say, read to me. And then he falls asleep. And then I stop reading. And then he wakes up and is like, oh, you stopped reading. And I'm like, you're asleep. I want him to have a book that he reads on his own next to me. And then you know what I mean? But that's never happened. So, I mean, I think one of the ththings that I guess that helps me be really productive is that I'm extremely sensitive to other people's energies. So when I'm around a lot of people for a lot, whether it's teaching or socializing or even just being in an airport or something like that, or even in a mall or shopping or whatever, I need time alone. So the time alone can be, I like to go for a walk. At home, I go for a walk on the beach. And sometimes I allow my mind to float freely. Other times I multitask and I answer all my emails on the walk, which is really sort of useful thing. But then when I get onto the actual beach, I just observe the nature. But then there's a 15-minute walk to the beach. And during then it's I'll just be okay, and I'll just get some stuff done on the way to the beach. And then I carve out time to do writing each day because the writing really fulfills me. So it depends on what my practice schedule is so if I'm home, sometimes what I will do is do my sitting practice, my prayer practice, those few kind of restorative poses. Then I'll go and I'll write for 30 minutes to an hour. And then I'll do my Ashtanga practice because my mind is really clear and I'm often up before the rest of the world is up. So that's somehow really, really helpful. But here in Mysore, they don't have that time. So I'm doing my writing kind of after I come back from my asana practice. And, just whatever it is to carve out the time for that, I do. And that's another way also that somehow I detach from the overstimulation and I just kind of get in my space and work with it.
Yeah. I mean, because on those workshops, you're teaching so many people sometimes. I've come to a workshop. I met you in London that time. So many people there, all wanting a part of you, a piece of you. And it must be very draining at times, right? And very overstimulating. So I can imagine once you've been and done all that, you want to kind of go and just be alone for a while, right?
Yeah, I love the energy of teaching. I think there's really nothing more magical than kind of like sharing space in a group class where there's kind of a powerful energy that's carrying each of the students, yet still on their own individual journey. And I really love being present for all the students after, when people come up and, want a picture, they have a question. I love when people bring me a copy of my book to sign. I'm never unhappy to do that. And then when it's over, I want to be alone. So some people will say like, oh, let's go out to dinner. And I'll be like, yeah, like takeout and sitting at home is better for me. Just because I feel like it like, I love it. It's awesome. And I know if I'm going to recharge and be good for the next day, I do need a bit of quiet time myself after that. And that could be, going for a walk in nature, or sometimes talking to someone that's not a yoga person is also potentially, like, I have some really old friends in London that I know from before, that just aren't really like yoga people. So sometimes I could see one of them for an hour and we just won't talk at all about anything yoga related. And I'll hear about like their life as a lawyer or something like that. And then that's kind of like entertaining in a different way, but I always nevertheless still need some time alone.
Well, another thing I picked up from your book, and I was going to ask you, what's the next book, by the way? What are you writing on now?
Yeah.
The neuro reprogramming?
Yeah. I mean, so this book that I just came out with called Act of Love, it came because through, and I mentioned before that there was like a big kind of disastrous, tumultuous period that I was going through, and that's kind of mentioned in that book as well. And then I felt that I literally had this experience on a meditation retreat where I had kind of really processed all of that stuff, and I saw through the different layers of kind of the root seed of where this cycle of suffering came from, and the root seed of this other cycle of suffering, where that came from. And I sort of saw through it all, and I was feeling like, wow, I feel so much lighter. And at the end of the retreat, then I had this presence that I just really felt have come into the room, which I would identify as the presence of God. And I just felt this voice kind of really say to me, and just, it almost like laid the words on my heart, let everything you do be an act of love. And it was kind of humorous because I was holding a toothbrush at the same time. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me. I'm brushing my teeth, and I just heard it again. And I was like, okay, here we go. Like, love my teeth. And then I started to really dissect what that meant. If I was going to act in this way, I had to understand what action was. I had to understand what love was. And then I would have to understand what that would mean in terms of my thinking, my being, my work, and all of the different interactions. And then I just, took that paradigm and applied it to all of these different situations that one may encounter in life. And I've really drawn upon all of my teaching experience and all of my meditation experience and all of the extra reading that I do to sort of see how we can actually be different people by learning to think different thoughts and learning to take different actions based on thinking different thoughts. So if we really think, is the root of this action that I'm doing, whether it's starting a new business or going out to lunch with a friend or buying this outfit or eating this food, is this really a way that I'm acting in love? And to act in love is to act in alignment with the universe, to act into alignment with your higher self, to really fulfill your life's purpose. And then to ask that question over and over again is to really realize how often we don't choose that path, how often we choose the lower ground, and we're not acting in love, but we're acting in selfishness, we're acting in spite, we're acting in pride, we're acting in arrogance. And then to see that is really humbling and hopefully creates enough crack in the veneer of ego to be willing to say, okay, maybe I need a practice to help me think new thoughts and take new actions. And so that's kind of the whole foundation of this book. And I will tell you that I had a really good program for how to write the yoga posture-based books. But when I had this idea, it was very difficult because I had no program. There was no, asana to just kind of fall back on. I really had to create a structure out of kind of this amorphous teaching that would always come up in the context of teaching asanas, but divorced from asanas. I wanted someone who'd never done an asana in their life to be able to read this book and be kind of inspired to live a better life and to understand what love means, and maybe potentially be inspired to take up some sort of practice. So it actually took a lot of iterations to come up with the structure of how to write this. And I hope so that I have another idea for a non-asana book, but I'm working on an asana book right now. I'm actually working on accessible Ashtanga. So that, I'm currently working on it. And the thesis behind accessible Ashtanga is that is to address the question of accessibility from the intersections of social justice. So to really ask what accessibility means in Ashtanga yoga, and to kind of also, deconstruct a little bit of the reasons why maybe we haven't made the practice accessible yet. Like why isn't it yet acceptable? To sort of do all these modifications, and what does it mean to modify? And when are we deviating from the lineage, and when are we holding true to the lineage? And so every asana will have a chair variation and a floor variation for every single asana. And I'm doing primary series and second series, including, all the standing poses and the closing poses. Because the reality of it is that there are people like my mom, who has 2 total knee replacements, who will never open her lotus position. There are people with total hip replacements, or, metal rods in their backs, or, degenerative neurological disorders, stroke victims, people that are recovering from various forms of cardiovascular issues, people that have had long COVID and things like that are just not going to be able to ever, stretch and open to such a degree, that we wouldn't want to measure their practice in that way. Like we're not, like my mom with her total knee replacements, we never really want her to close the knee. Otherwise she could be damaging, the medical upgrade that's allowing her to walk free. So I'm thinking, like, how can we make her feel welcome without just being like, okay, well, you can never do lotus, so you're stuck at Ardha Baddha Padmottanasana. Like, that's not acceptable, So
yeah, I can't imagine you ever teaching that way. Did you ever teach that way? Like that kind of classic? I don't imagine you ever taught in that exactly that kind of rigid way, right? It doesn't come across in your personality anyway. The book is great. I mean, the Act of Love is a fantastic book. I really have enjoyed it, and the structuring is amazing. It's very clear to everyone, so please read it. And it's worthwhile. But Kina is very candid in it. You speak very candidly about your own struggles. I've learned a lot of things. Your relationship with Jesus Christ, interesting. I was going to ask you about your TV show, but I found out from the book it's Game of Thrones. You do mention Game of Thrones in there, but but you were really honest in it, and it's funny because everyone's going to look at you and go, well, this is a person who has ability in asana and who's going all over the world to teach, and there's what has she got to worry about, right? I mean, but you speak there about having some pretty dark times. I mean, would you like to kind of briefly touch upon the motivation that got you into writing the book? Because I think that's important for people to hear as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing that happened for me was that, first of all, I've struggled with depression since I was a little girl. So since the time I'm 9 years old, I can look back now and I can see that there have been these periods of depression. So there was this kind of really difficult, this sort of difficult period in my life where a really, really difficult legal battle was going on. My father passed away, and my father was like my rock in my life, in a way that I'm so grateful that I had a father like that. And then there were just a whole host of other various stupid, small things that were also just adding to the general sense of grief and devastation and loss. And in the wake of this, I felt completely like I was drowning and like there was really no way out. And I just kept feeling like I was not able to find the light again. And it just felt like an overwhelming wave of grief, sorrow, and loss. And it was kind of that led me into the sort of quest that brought me to that meditation retreat, where I processed the sort of root of a lot of the things that had sort of gone on. And then the whole kind of revelation of understanding that, well, I have a kind of like an interesting intersection to sit at. I practice Buddhist meditation. My grandfather is Japanese and was Buddhist. And I feel that this is, a really wonderful part of my ancestry that I tap into when I sit and then I practice. And this very traditional yoga from India, from the traditional Hindu practice. And then I also had this revelatory experience where I never thought that I would, but I had this relationship with Jesus kind of appear. And for me, I felt like, wow, I'm like sitting at the intersection of three major world religions, and yet I feel not constricted by the dogma of any. And that is also really somehow interesting, because I feel like, and liberating, because I talk to some people who are really scared of practicing yoga because they consider themselves devout Christians. And then I talk to people who are really kind of against the teaching of Jesus because of the formal, organization and all the harm that the church has done in the past. And, then it's just this really kind of powerful place to be able to sit at and integrate. And at the same time, I'm constantly thinking about being respectful to the cultures of origin and being respectful, not to appropriate, but to really learn and integrate as much as possible.
Hey there, it's Kino here. I just wanted to take a moment and thank you for tuning in to my show here on UK Health Radio, the world's #1 talk health radio. Your support really means the world to me. I'm inspired by the fact that you're inspired and that you tune in each week and keep the inspiration to get on your mat and keep practicing and make the world a happier and more peaceful place. Remember, you can always practice with me on omstars.com. That's www.omstars.com. If you're inspired to read my books, you can check those out on any available online bookseller. Just search for my name, Kino MacGregor. And my newest book called Get Your Yoga On is perfect for beginners. You can check that out. Otherwise, stay tuned and I'll see you next week.